states that do. The sales tax is being challenged all the time. It's being challenged because the base is fundamentally changing. Services in the United States that aren't taxed are increasing, and goods that are taxed are decreasing in our economy. At the same time, we have internet taxation that is continually making it more difficult to collect the sales tax. So if you think about the sales tax, it's not a rate problem, it's a base problem. And I think with this kind of tax system, it clearly becomes a base problem. And the base problem always will be, how do you value the property? How do you value the land? Because the land sales, an independent piece of land that's sold, it's very thin. Everywhere you look, there's some kind of improvement on the land. So when you look at the sales, which will include the improvement and the land, you have a challenge. And the challenge is, how do you make that separation? And I would like to tell you that we've got that all figured out in tax policy and tax administration. We don't. We don't do a very good job of trying to separate the value of the building from the value of the land. And it complicates, whatever you do, it complicates what you're trying to do. So let me make another suggestion that I think would be helpful for the papers. When you do a residual method, where you try to figure out what the value of the land is, when you take away the value of the building, you end up looking at the cost approach to valuation. So you try to approach what it would cost to rebuild a particular piece of a building on the property. That is always a challenge, but I believe, and maybe it's there, just is not reported, I think it's important that people who read these papers understand where you come up with your cost approach values. You know, a sidebar table that would suggest this is how we value a particular type of property, particular type of building per square foot. And then you do something that is really interesting, and that is you take out depreciation. Now, typically we call that an obsolescence adjustment. It would be interesting to know what kind of scaling you use or what kind of matrix you use to pull that out. Why? Because countries that think about doing this need to understand how you make that adjustment for diminished quality. And then you make some adjustments for the location around roads and other things. That would also be important. Again, not a major part of the paper, but people who read this, the immediate response is, well, we can't make a separation between land and building. But if you could give us some hint, some sense, an example or two of how you make adjustments for location on the value of the capital improvements, I think what you do would be helpful for us to see how you do that. You use several committees to sort of adjudicate differences between values. And I would like to know how that works. You probably would like to know how that works. It becomes a political process, and that's unfortunate. I understand why you do it for those political reasons, but it would be helpful if we had a little more information about how those valuation committees, both for buildings and land, operate. Now, I've probably added about 50 pages to your paper, and I apologize that. It's not that I don't like trees, but I think those are things that would be helpful as you think about your paper. And I couldn't agree more with Roy about the importance of validating the self-reported values that we find. If you have those kind of disclosure laws, and you can validate those disclosure laws, you will fundamentally improve the tax administration and the outcomes of tax policy. And that would be a strong suggestion to me. A final thing. In the 60s, there was a lawsuit in the city of Boston that included people like Dan Holland and Ollie Oldman, and names that you may or may not be familiar with. they played for the Boston Red Sox, if that helps any. But the lawsuit was over the inequities in the property tax system in the city of Boston. An article in the National Tax Association that had very simple numbers in it. But the Boston Globe picked up on this story and wrote issue after, I don't know, 3 or 4 big issues on the inequities in the property tax system in the city of Boston. The result was a reappraisal throughout Massachusetts. But I think it had implications for the entire United States. Academics suddenly got interested in reporting inequities in the property tax system. So one of the things I think your papers could do is spend a little more time and identify some of the sales ratio problems you've identified, and also look at the dispersion that results from the perhaps inadequate administration. And I believe that kind of information encourages the press and the public to become more engaged in the property tax, and I think more interested in getting the right answer. And so I would urge you, you have powerful weapons there, and I think you ought to consider using it. The administration costs you talk about, and it might be difficult to figure out exactly what it is. I would like to understand exactly how high or how low it really is. It may be that it's not as expensive as you think it is, and it may be, if you do the study and can report it, you'll realize we need to spend more on this. I suspect that's what you're going to have, that we're not putting enough money into it. We have two groups valuing property in the land and the building. I'm sure you don't realize this, but Harris County, Texas, Houston used to have 2 systems. The property was appraised by the local assessor for tax purposes for the city and counties, and the property was appraised by the school districts for valuation for the schools. And guess what? It was a mess because they never were the same, and suddenly there were fights. Well, if they say it's this and they say it's that, now your problem is probably not as complex as that, but it does, if you can think about it, moving in the direction of a more uniform one system. And I'm saying something that you're going, well, duh. Of course that's what we should be doing. So in conclusion, interesting papers. I want this to be right. I want you to point out the advantages and the flaws, because I believe the economics around this kind of taxation is absolutely spot on, and we need to find ways to learn from some challenges you have had so that other countries, when they think about this, can say, yeah, it's hard to do, but we can make the right decisions to make it right. We can learn from challenges. We can learn from mistakes, and I think Taiwan can do that probably better than any other country in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. And well, thank you for the comment and the recommendation, and also for asking more and more from the papers, Gary. Okay. What I'm going to do, I'm going to see if there will be any questions or comments or opinions from the floor before I will ask our 3 presenters to summarize what they are doing, and after listening to the comments, what will be the instant response. Okay. Any? Jim, are you going to give another question? And Professor Roach? Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Jim. I'll give you this one. Okay, not a long one.
No, not a long one. Well, wait, I'm an academic. I only talk for 1 hour, hour and a half, or 3 hours. No, just a quick comment here, because I was thinking when in FAO we would propose land tax as a way of having a policy tool, etc. Everybody would run. That's because we didn't have a good system of explaining why property taxes. So as Gary pointed out, I think is a very good thing that what do property taxes do? How do you see the way they're used? And then how do you make the public involved in determining why they would want to pay any kind of property tax. And when we have the history of paying taxes, we don't have the history of why I would want to pay taxes. And I think we need to bring this aspect in if we're going to have good tax policy spreading to other countries which can benefit from the experience that we're talking about here.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Yeah. I was thinking that George is going to ask a question. Yes, I know. Trying to explain to the general public why they have to pay tax is difficult. Or explain this to the students is okay. We have to pay tax to finance the spending of the government, such that we are not going to place the tax on your income only, but we also place the tax on consumption. And also, well, if you're wealthy enough, you own property, then we are going to impose a tax on the ownership of property. So, and also we mentioned something about fiscal federalism, such that the central government do something, the local government do something, such that the most reliable and equitable and efficient revenue for the local government would be the property tax, especially on real property. I do believe that we do a very good explanation to our student, to our participant. However, to our general public, that will be completely different story. I know we understand. However, to ask the tax administration to explain why they have to tax will not be so easy. They will be really, really efficient to collect the tax. Okay. However, explain why they have to collect the tax. They just do not know. I know that's one thing we have to understand. Okay. Any further question? Any more question from the audience? If not, I will give the time to our three presenter and see what will be the instant response and or further explanation or clarification. So we'll go with my student first. No. I will go by the order of presentation. Okay, 子谦你先来。
Thank you to give me the opportunity to illustrate a little bit more. And actually, Professor would talk about we had two camps in Taiwan on the issue of property tax, and we don't agree with each other. And one group of people is my group of people, the land economist, land administrator. Another group will be the economist. But I have to confess that I am not a conventional land economist, and I don't think we still disagree with each other. We actually agree with each other on many things, but we have arguments about some little details. In my position, I spend more time on the tax base. And I was actually sitting in one of the committees. I was sitting in the valuation committee for the Taipei City for about 2 years. The committee, how the committee is functioning is every year the committee will gather at least once or twice to look at the valuation results submitted by the government officials. But in reality, we were not able to look into the details of every assessment for every parcel. So we rely on the evidence they produce. So they tend to tell us that what is the average rise of the land value in this district and in another district, and do you have anything that you don't, is there anything you don't agree with or you want to ask some questions? So normally, we only have 2 meetings for the valuation for the whole Taipei City. So I personally, I do suggest them to produce something that we can examine on, rather than something that we cannot disagree with. I believe they are working on that. But another 2 issues I want to raise is, firstly, there have been increasing number of valuation disputes in the court at the moment because the government actually raised the tax base. To me, it's a good thing because people now feel the burden of the tax. So they care very much about how their property is valued. And those lawsuits normally come from the five-star hotels because they pay a lot. That's very important, like Taipei 101 for the housing tax. Annually, Taipei 101 pay 200 million NT, over 200 million NT annually to the Taipei City government. So my suggestion is that the government have to produce something they can defend, and that will help we to look closer to the property assessment. And talking about the data, the quality of the data, the government introduced of the system that require the property seller to report the actual transaction price since August 2012. The law says the government will look into the accuracy of the data, and there will be penalty if someone did not report the price truthfully. I'm also curious about how they do it, but I only know they actually examine the data. And when they put the data online, they took out those data they believe they are not actually reported truthfully in order not to misguide the people who are reading the data. But I don't know how exactly do they actually run some tests to see if they are truthfully reported. I don't know, but by law they should. And also, Professor Wu mentioned those data was not used in the transaction, the capital gain tax. If I recall correctly, when the government wanted to introduce that mandatory reporting system, one condition is the government should not use the data to tax people. But personally, I think one day, and you will come very soon, the data will be used. And I think that would be an improvement for our system. I'm not very much, I'm not totally optimistic about the future improvement, but I'm not pessimistic either. So I think we have room to improve, and we will improve.
Okay, thanks for the comments. I totally agree with the good economics but bad politics. You know, the design of the systems may follow a very good economics, but sometimes it fails because of the politics. And so I think we need to kind of focus on the economics advantages of like land value tax, and then make it clear, like why it's good or it's bad, and then maybe that will provide the good lessons to those countries which would like to consider to implement land value tax.
Thank you for comments. For my part, since the real estate transaction income tax has implemented for about 2 years, since 2016, and now there's a dual system. When you own a building before 2014, subject to the old tax system, that is the land increment tax, and the gain from house is included in your income tax. But since 2016, now there's a new real estate transaction income tax. So if we can have more and more data, we can look at what happened. It's the tax system capture the actual realized capital gain, and maybe we can make future recommendation. Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you very much. Okay,
The last section actually we cover related to the property tax system in Taiwan. However, in the free presentation by my colleague and my previous students, we all understand that we do not only talk about property tax on land value tax and house tax. We also talk about something on a special capital gains on real estate transaction in Taiwan. Well, in theory, we treat this one as an income tax. And the one interesting thing is in Taiwan's structure, the land value tax, land value income tax, a special income tax, and house tax, they are all local government's revenue. And the income tax system itself is the central government's revenue. So instead of overhauling the whole system, the central government in 2016, that was in 2015, they tried to reform the income tax system such that to tax the capital gains from real property transactions by the central government in the right rate. However, well, according to our constitution, it is quite impossible to have a constitutional amendment to erase the land value income tax from our constitution. So to keep this land value income tax in our tax map and let the local government to collect, as possible, the land value income tax they used to collect, then we have to reform our income tax system to take the land value income tax liability as a tax credit against the central government's income tax. Well, I was in the committee. Actually, any bad thing that has accumulated by the Minister of Finance, I was in the committee. Okay, so our central government finally, they decide to deduct the tax base. That is the unreliable or unreal capital gains of our land value income tax from the income tax base instead of taking the land value income tax a tax credit. So that system began in 2016. So we are still in 2018. We do not know the result of it yet. However, in making this change, I believe that as far as the central government is concerned, we will do a better job in collecting capital gains tax from real estate transactions. So that is our mind. So we will take another 3 or 4 years and see what is the result of this reform, whether it is a reform getting better or actual deterioration. So the central government, the Minister of Finance, has asked me to wait for another 2 or 3 years that they will commission a project to do an evaluation on that. And that is pretty much okay. Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you very much, Roy, for your very good discussion. And also, thank you very much to Professor Nin, Professor Wu, and also to Professor Yao. And of course, I have to say thank you again to the Lincoln Institute and also to the ICLPST and my good friend Jim. Thank you very much for your helpful question. Thank you for the audience, for the attendance.
Thank you to our Professor Tsui. Thank you to our moderator, our presenters, and our discussants. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was our panel 3. And for the closing, I have to ask Professor Lin Ziqing to please stay for the research summary, right? Okay, thank you so much. Again, Professor Lin.
Am I after too? Yeah. Or after?
I was told I have 5 minutes, but I can have more. Okay. First of all, on behalf of the 9 professors who write 8 papers and the 1 acting as the advisor, we have been working since last September. And first of all, I would like to, on behalf of the whole team, to express our gratitude to Lincoln Institute and ICLPST in supporting the teamwork. When I was approached to write a number of papers about what happened over the last half century in Taiwan regarding the land taxation and the land policy, to be honest, I was terrified, even though that's an interesting issue to me, and that's what I learned since I was 18 years old. And that was kind of my dream to see something to be documented about Taiwan. But I know it's a tough job to, I wouldn't call it lead a team, to coordinate a number of professors. Professor is kind of person who won't be controlled in any way. You can't tell them what to do and when to submit their chapters. And I'm not a senior one. I'm kind of in the middle. So I decided that I will find a team that is relatively young, who might listen to me to a certain extent. It took me quite some time to actually find a team of 8 professors. So I also want to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues who were willing to work with me for several months. We actually had a meeting more than 6 times. All of the meeting took place in the evening, from 6:30 to 9:30, even to 10 o'clock. And I told them it's a contract signed, so we had to stick to the contract. Otherwise, there's penalty, but I didn't tell them what penalty is. But there's no penalty. But we managed to submit the results in time. So I would like to thank everyone who involved in the project. And also, about the research, I'm not going to the details of each paper, but I do think there are 2 things in Taiwan that just recently happened that deserve our attention. The first thing is the August 2012, the government started requesting the property seller to report the actual transaction price. I think there's something significant in our policy making. It affects not only the assessment for the tax base, also it affects the market transparency. Because of that, the rating of market transparency for the real estate in Taiwan actually rise significantly in some international reports. And that gives the government a chance to actually implement the tax policy we promised years ago. Because the market transparency, I do believe in the near future, we should be able to make some improvements that we couldn't have done in the past. And the second thing that's significant is the National Spatial Planning Act that passed in 2 years ago. That actually kind of restructured the land use nationwide. That gives another opportunity for Taiwan to think about our land use. That's another opportunity we had to grasp. And there are 2 things that led to what we've seen in Taiwan about the land problem we have. The first thing is the deregulation of agricultural land. As the paper mentioned before year 2000, not everyone could purchase a piece of land. But after year 2000, I can buy a piece of farmland, and that is something affect the land use in Taiwan. Another thing that affects Taiwan is the loose enforcement of law. The government never said we allow the factory on the farmland. They never said that. The government never said without permission everyone can build some extra space on top of the buildings. The government never said that. So if we look at Taiwan, even as an industrialized country, in some respect, we look like developing countries. And the people come to Taiwan, ask me why almost every building would have a little small on top illegal extension. We have illegal structure from the city to the farmland. It's definitely not right. It's nothing to do with the theory, nothing to do with the 商业线. It's something to do with the enforcement of our law. I do believe there are 2 problems the mistake we made in the past, and I really hope that we can make it right. Lastly, I do hope you enjoy the 8 papers, and no matter you find the achievement or the problem we have in Taiwan, I do hope you can take something positive from our presentation and make a better policy for your country. And once again, thank you very much, and enjoy staying in Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Lin. Thank you. Wonderful 8 papers, wonderful research summary. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, and now for the closing remarks, please join me in welcoming Dr. George McCarthy, our President and CEO of Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. Thank you to Lincoln Institute of Land Policy for sponsoring our event, our forum, and our research papers.
Thank you. Well, thank you all, and it's been a long day, but it's been a fruitful day. And you know, one of the things I take away from the day is that if we think about land policy in Taiwan over the last 50 years, I think it's like a study in sequential problem solving, where you kind of understand the problem in front of you, you figure out a solution, and then it creates its own other issue. You figure out the solution to that. You figure out a solution to something else that comes at you from another side. But the thing about Taiwan is that the land policy started built on a very sound foundation of principle, and you have to love that. And that's the thing that attracted the Lincoln Institute in the first place, because Taiwan was built on a principle that said we can use land policy to promote social equity. We can use land policy to get to the kinds of outcomes that we know we can get to where other places haven't. We can combat poverty. We can combat inequality in our systems by getting land policy right. And so we found that fascinating enough that we helped to found the center. So one of the constants we learned across all the panels and all the papers was, of course, what we just heard from Chu Chin, which is that there's a big distance between the conception of the policy and the implementation of the policy. And one of the things we learned is that the implementation very often falls short of the aspirations we have for policies. You know, in the case of the agricultural land reform panels, we learned that everybody's building big mansions on agricultural land and not paying any tax on them. And now people are putting illegal industries on agricultural land and not paying any tax on that. And what does it tell us? Well, it tells us, like everything else, that any policy framework you create, people can circumvent, because people find ways to game the system. They can get around the system, and we just need to find ways to do a better job of enforcing it. On urban land reforms, we also learned that, you know, that land readjustment got co-opted by developers, right? When these, you know, association-led land readjustments, developers are coming in and kind of using it as a tool to kind of actually displace lots of other landowners, to the extent that they're now taking to the streets. And of course, on the taxation panel, we learned that there were the huge valuation problems, poor administration problems, and the aspiration of taxing land at a higher rate than buildings was never actually achieved because of defects in the administration of the taxes. So, you know, we learned all that, but in the end, what does that tell us? Well, it just tells us that we're imperfect. Land policy is imperfect. And what it also tells us is that as a land policy studies center, you're doing your job. That's what you do. People create land policies, you study them, and you remind them that you set out, you had an aspiration to achieve this, you didn't quite get there, let's work together to make it better. And one of the things that you have to appreciate over the last 50 years in Taiwan, as imperfect as the land policy was, that lots of good things happened. You guys grew faster than almost every economy in the globe for 20 years. You urbanized without creating slums. You were able to protect agricultural land, and you know, you still are able to find ways to feed yourselves. So it's not a bad story. It's not a bad story that things aren't quite working as well as we hoped they would work. And certainly one of the things that we hoped when we started this session and we asked for this research was, could we find a way to tell the story of land policy in Taiwan to learn the lessons that could help to inform other places that haven't been able to get anything close to the achievements that Taiwan has gotten over the last 50 years. And I think there's a lot here in these papers, and there's a lot here that we can do to help spread that around the world. But one of the things that struck me at the end of the session that we did on the urban land, when Jim started asking all the depressing questions about, well, now with the aging society, look at the aging building stock, look at the aging infrastructure, look at the unassailable challenges we have going forward for the next 50 years. And you're right. I mean, they look really big. And you know, one of the things about economists is they can always add up a problem to make it look really big and unassailable. But then I thought, you know, if we rewind the clock to the 1960s, and we think about, you know, the 6 million people in Taiwan that welcomed another 2 million evacuees from mainland China with no place to live, with not enough food to go around, with not enough industry or jobs, and thinking about them looking 50 years forward, I dare say that the challenges that they faced then look a lot worse than the challenges we face now. We have the tools, we have the resources, we have all sorts of things at our disposal that they didn't have at their disposal. And yet, over 50 years, they put together a spectacular record of success. Imperfect as it is, they were able to get things done. So this is something that we need to keep in mind, because there's a story that's going to be told 50 years from now, and we hope the story is as good as the story of the last 50 years, because we're going to get things wrong, but the one thing that we need to be able to do is find ways to get them better, and get them better incrementally, get them better in big ways, and get them better in ways that actually serve the needs of everybody. But I think the principles are still there, the commitment is still there, and I think that there's many things that we can do to continue to learn from the experience of Taiwan to bring to the rest of the world through the ICLPST and through the work of the Lincoln Institute, who can bring this to the rest of the world in a different way. So I really thank you for participating in this all day today. I thank the researchers for all the work that you did, and I hope that we'll be able to hammer those papers into something that we can really do, share with so many of the other places in the world that need the tools that you need. We need to appreciate the willingness of Taiwan to use and try out different tools and different instruments when they needed them, and find ways to make them work, even if they didn't work perfectly, right? And we need to find ways to get others to be able to be willing to experiment and try and to make things better, even if they don't get it perfect. And I think that we'll be able to do that. So I thank you all. I thank the Center for putting together a magnificent event. I thank our MC, who did a fantastic job. And I hope that you're able to join us for the graduation ceremony that follows and the dinner. And I look forward to 50 years of success, 50 more years of success. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. McCarthy, President and CEO of Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. Taiwan thanks you. We thank you. Once again, our applause. Dr. McCarthy. And we thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us here today. And all of you are invited back tonight in 1 hour's time. Please come back at 6 p.m. for the banquet, the dinner party. For now, please bring your personal belongings. We must readjust the table. The hotel people will readjust the table, okay? So please come back at 6 p.m. for the dinner party. And we promise you, it's going to be fun tonight. It's going to be fun. We've got singing, we've got dancing, we've got celebrations for our 50th anniversary. Thank you. See you at 6. Thank you. So that was 3 years ago.